Hello everybody. Today we are talking about a topic which I completely glossed over in my World War I video. And that is the protest of the German sailors that started in 1918 and eventually caused the government of the Kaiser to collapse and not one but two competing governments forming to fill in the vacuum. This means we will talk about the Kieler Mutiny and the wider Novemberrevolution. It's a story about war, insubordination, protest, rebellion, revolution, and betrayal. And amazingly, basically nobody in the entire English-speaking world has ever heard about it. So let's start. Right after you subscribed, because I want to reach 50,000 subscribers before January, so you seriously need to subscribe or I will feel bad. That being said, let's get into the historical context. This story we're telling will only start at the end of World War I in 1918, but it's important to keep in mind that the unified German state was very young at this point. It only formed in 1871 during the Franco-Prussian War. Before then, Germany was always deliberately kept in the form of many single nations that barely ever had a unified German identity. The reason was that if all of German-speaking Europe united, they would completely upset the balance of power in Europe. This is why Austria and France spent the entire post-Napoleonic time trying to prevent a German unification. But then, Prussia got a good chancellor and an even better military strategist, and they defeated both the Austrian and French armies. And they even captured the French emperor and accidentally turned Paris into a socialist commune. I have a video on that. The war was basically Prussia and its allies, aka all predominantly German states besides Austria, against France. The Prussians won more or less because they were better at using the railroads to mobilize, because they had more advanced breech-loading rifles, and most importantly, their emperor wasn't a sad off-brand wannabe Napoleon. But long story. Essentially, the Germans won and proclaimed the German Empire in the Hall of Mirrors in Versailles, which is the seat of the French emperors. Historians usually classify this as a dick move. That didn't help the French-German relations at all. In addition, Germany got the regions of Alsace and Lorraine, which had both French and German speakers, so it was disputed territory. They also got a frickload of reparations from the French government, which they spent on a shiny new parliament building called the Reichstag, which couldn't do jack shit without approval of the emperor, but hey, it was there, so yay for spending money on purely symbolic government organs. Now there was a single unified German state with 41 million inhabitants, the largest army in the world, the largest industry and working population in the world thanks to the Ruhr area, which was super industrialized because it had lots of coal, and a great waterway in the form of the Rhine. Kiel was a very large city in the German Empire at the time. It had always been a major city, being located on the northern European trade routes, but the German Kaiser declared it the main base of the Eastern Fleet. The Western Fleet was instead anchored in Wilhelmshaven. Of course, along with the fleet came many more advances for the city. It needed places for the sailors to stay, docks to repair and upgrade ships, slipways to build new ones, metalworking industry large enough to provide the massive amounts of hardened steel that made up the hulls of the ships, stores and markets to feed all these people, and so on. All of this combined led Kiel to be the fastest growing city in the entire German Empire. Of course, all these industrial workers, and even the sailors, were influenced by the politics of their time, meaning they may or may not have been socialists. I wonder how they would see a large war between imperialist nations to the detriment of the working people. Now, you may be wondering why Germany, which doesn't have a large naval tradition like the UK, needed such a large navy to dedicate whole cities to that at all. And because I was criticized for not going into military details last time, we're doing it now. The obvious reason was colonialism. In the so-called scramble for Africa, all European nations tried to get a part of the less developed African continent. Basically, they drew lines and decided that those looked good, without considering religion, culture, or even geography when placing the borders. Their main goal was exploiting natural resources and enslaving people. As you can see here, the UK and France got the largest part, and Germany, despite having a more powerful and larger army than the UK and France, got colonies which were smaller than the ones Belgium got, which Germans perceived as a massive humiliation. Nevertheless, Germany built a grand navy to defend its access to the colonies. If they had no navy, then their cargo ships sailing from the colonies to their homeland could be intercepted by pirates or even a hostile navy in the case of war. But if Germany had many big warships, then people would think twice about attacking a ship that flies German flag. And the second major reason Germany wanted a large navy was the British Royal Navy. They wanted to be the best and strongest nation in the world. And when it came to the economy and army, they already were. But they couldn't rival the Royal Navy. And they were worried that if they ever went to war with Britain, they could be navally blockaded and cut off from the colonies which their economy needed. The issue was that the Royal Navy was intentionally kept so large that it could not only be the second largest navy in the world, but also the second and third largest navy together. This was called the two-power standard. Germany was building more surface warships, but Britain wasn't concerned since their navy was way bigger. But then the British did an oopsie. They commissioned the HMS Dreadnought, a ship that was faster than all previous ones, more armored, had better weapons, it was cheaper, and it was faster to produce. This one ship would have been able to defeat every other fleet on its own. It could bombard them from before it was in range of their guns, and it could disengage faster than others could follow. This is why it was called Dreadnought. It needed to dread nothing. You may think the British having this ship would be the best possible news for them, but it was more of an own goal. Because now all an enemy country would have to do was build two dreadnoughts and their navy would outrank the British one. And who else but the Germans decided to give it a go. For about 15 years, Germany and the UK were pumping out dreadnoughts at massive speeds, trying to one-up each other. Therefore, Kiel grew so quickly. It had the largest shipbuilding capacity of the entire German Empire. And naturally, ships need sailors. So they pumped out propaganda about the navy in the entire German Empire. The same way the US Navy tries to recruit all around the United States. The fact that these sailors were from pretty much everywhere will come up again later. In the early 1910s, Germany was struggling to pay for the largest army in the world and the second largest navy, so in 1912 they gave up on outproducing the British. They were aware that they couldn't defeat the Royal Navy, but they were more or less content with the second place. They updated the naval strategy, so instead of using big navy to defeat the Royal Navy, they would build submarines that couldn't be caught by the British to destroy their resource transports. As I mentioned in the World War I video, a Bosnian Serb shot the Austrian Archduke. So Austria went to war with Serbia, and Germany went to war with everyone. Last time I dismissed the Western Front in favor of the war in the East and the Soviet Revolution. So let's now do the opposite. The Germans used early 1914 pretty well, and they pushed almost all the way through Belgium in an attempt to reach Paris. As explained last time, they underestimated Russia, so Germany quickly had to move troops to the east, leaving them with too few troops to advance in the west. So they got a great idea: trench warfare. What they did was dig a trench, place machine guns and artillery, and wait for the enemy to attack. The enemy quickly learned that attacking was suicide, so they also dug trenches and waited. The only action there was on both sides were constant sniper fire and the occasional suicide charges ordered by generals who didn't know what a machine gun was. Of course, throughout the war, tactics would improve. For example, they invented trench raiding, which just means sneaking through the no man's land and using a club to kill people silently. And the creeping barrage, which means slowly firing closer and closer to the enemy while the infantry follows the bombardment. Both of these had some effect, but there was still no real movement in the trenches. There was one major naval battle at Jutland, which neither side won, but a bunch of ships got damaged, and it was too expensive to repair them for Germany, so they kept them in port for the rest of the war. This allowed the British to blockade Germany from resources. By 1917, the Russian Revolution happened, and there was peace in the east, allowing Germany to use all troops in the west for a final blow. The Kaiser was impatient with the war, so he ordered his submarines, sometimes called U-boats, to attack every ship going to or coming from the enemy coast. This pretty much instantly hit an American ocean liner. This caused the Americans to declare war on Germany. At least that's the version the news spread. Another important factor was that the American banks that loaned Britain and France money were worried that if the Germans won now, they wouldn't get their money back, so they lobbied the government to help Britain and France. This led to America joining the war. Now it was a race between American troops coming over the Atlantic to defend France and German troops from the Eastern Front trying to take Paris and force France to surrender before America brought overwhelming force. Germany used the trench raiding and stormtrooper tactics to great effect, and they slowly pushed the front line closer towards Paris, using up all of their reserves. But eventually, the fresh American troops managed to halt the advance, with the aid of the battle-hardened French and British, of course. At this point, senior members of the German government began to consider that they may lose the war. They wanted to negotiate a surrender. Everyone had different goals. Some wanted to keep the Kaiser as a figurehead, some wanted a democratic republic, some even wanted a socialist Germany. But they were all pretty much sure that they needed to show that they were not yet defeated. They did this by ordering their troops to hold the Hindenburg Line, to inflict as many casualties on the enemy as possible. All of Germany was now aware that surrender was imminent. There was a severe lack of resources because of the British naval blockade. Austria and the Ottoman Empire were already in surrender negotiations, and worst of all, they were losing the land they had just won in the east to rebellion and the Russian Civil War. The writing was on the wall, and there were occasional protests across the empire to end the slaughter now. The High Command, on the other hand, felt like it needed one large show of force before entering into negotiations. And their sights fell on the Kriegsmarine, the Imperial fleet which spent the last 3 years sitting in harbor, costing a lot of money for no gain. They decided to sail the Kriegsmarine straight up to the Straits of Dover to bombard British and Flemish lands, just to show the Allies that if they didn't respect Germany in the negotiations, it could still inflict many more pointless deaths on their armies. So the order was sent out. Everything was ready for what basically amounted to a suicide charge. This may have been a great idea in the minds of the generals, admirals and nobles, but unsurprisingly, the sailors who manned the German high seas fleet did not enjoy the idea of being sent to their deaths as a bargaining chip. They learned from the plan because suddenly their captains talked about sacrificing their life for the Kaiser, which the conscripts were not on board with. Because of this, while the Kriegsmarine assembled for the last assault, some of the sailors started to mutiny. The captains responded with arresting 48 sailors. This was a bad idea. The sailors began trying to work together with the workers and land-based army units in Kiel. They protested in front of the prison and were shot at. This was an even worse idea. The soldiers formed soldiers and sailors committees which would collectively vote on what to do, and they completely stopped listening to their superiors and took over the entire city. The central government sent in a division of hardened soldiers from the front line to kill them all, but they refused and joined the rebelling city instead. All across Germany, though mostly in Kiel, the workers went on strike to support the sailors. They started making demands, ending the war and not being sent on suicide charges, for example. Then, inspired by the soldiers, the workers also formed workers' councils, which took over the civilian governments of the region. After some more time, the councils formed a unified regional government completely based on these councils, sort of like the Soviet Union did a year earlier. After fighting off some more armies sent by Berlin, they decided on 14 demands they would issue to the central German government. First, all prisoners and political prisoners in Germany should be released. Second, complete freedom of speech and press. Third, no more of the letter censorship in the army. Fourth, no more physical and verbal abuse of soldiers by superiors. Fifth, release all prisoners on the ships and in the barracks without punishment. Sixth, no to suicidal fleet operations. Seventh, stop sending armies to take over Kiel. Eighth, remove the armies already in place outside of Kiel. Ninth, from now on the councils decide which private property should exist. 10th, when soldiers are on their off time, they no longer should have to listen to the superiors. They should all be equal off duty. 11th, unrestricted personal freedom of everybody not in military service. 12th, all officers who agree with the council are welcome to join them, but those who don't have to resign now. 13th, members of the council no longer have to do their duty, which seems a bit self-serving. 14th, all future decisions can only be made by the councils. Naturally, the central government in Berlin didn't care about these demands. To sum it up quickly, in the government there were three main forces. The parties of the Reichstag, who wanted to change Germany to a parliamentary republic. These were the liberal parties, the Social Democrats and the capitalist conservatives. The second group were the Kaiser and the nobles, who wanted to keep their privilege to rule Germany without any of these annoying people trying to take part. And the third group were the socialists, who sought to build a council-based socialist republic. Of course, our mutinying friends in Kiel were mostly socialists. Over the days, the situation in Kiel became slowly less explosive. The councils still existed and still had most of the power, but the police was seen back on the streets and public transport began doing its job again. Then the protesters were calming down and many moved back home. And then there was a clear pattern of what happened. They arrived by train, they disarmed all officers, they marched to the next military installation with red flags, the soldiers followed them, and then they marched to the factories and the workers also joined in and formed council everywhere. At the same time, they were supported by the Spartacus League, which was essentially socialist revolutionaries who wanted to end the war with the emperor, and it smells like revolution. All over the empire, the people were in open rebellion, and everyone knew that the days of the Kaiser were numbered. The parties in the Reichstag were not certain on how to act from then on. They knew all the rebellion would only end once Kaiser and war were gone, but nobody was brave enough to demand the Kaiser abdicate. After a few days of nothing happening, the German Chancellor Max von Baden straight up said that the Kaiser is abdicating, without telling the Kaiser in the first place. Luckily for him, the Kaiser didn't believe he still had public support, so he fled to the Netherlands instead of contesting this announcement, which made him seem like a traitor and cost him the rest of his public support. Now the question was what to do without the Kaiser. They needed a new government. The liberal parties in the Reichstag wanted to make the Reichstag the main ruling government, with the Chancellor as the head of the government, while the socialists wanted their councils to take charge of the future of Germany by creating big local mega councils with representatives from smaller councils. Again, very similar to the idea behind the USSR. So the choice was between a liberal parliamentary republic or a socialist council communist republic. That decision of which of those would win was up to the Social Democratic Party, the SPD. It was one of those old parties in the Reichstag, but it had very strong ideological connections to the rebelling councils. The SPD was so popular that whatever side they joined would rule Germany in the future. The future of Central European socialism rested on the SPD's soldiers. If they decided based on their party manifesto, they should have supported the councils, but they betrayed them. The SPD sided with the liberal democracy under the condition that they would select a chancellor. So the Social Democrats betrayed their own ideals under the condition that they would be in charge. The other parties in the Reichstag agreed. Then the Social Democratic Party tried to peacefully resolve the situation in Kiel. They did this by sending one of their party members named Gustav Noske to Kiel to take charge of the surrounding province. The mutinying soldiers viewed Noske's arrival as a sign of support, but they couldn't have been more wrong. He held a very big speech in which he basically explained that the Social Democratic Party would not support the mutinying soldiers, but rather a liberal democracy. He told them to get back under the command of their superiors, and they naturally completely ignored that order. At this point, it was clear to everybody that the SPD was counter-revolutionary and acting against the will of the workers that had voted for them. They would rather work with capitalist parties than support a peaceful revolution just so they can be in power. This is why leftists, especially in Germany, do not think of Social Democrats as leftists. Leftists want to destroy capitalism. Social Democrats want to be in power. German leftists have a saying, "Wer hat uns verraten? Sozialdemokraten," which translates to, "Who betrayed us? The SPD." After the abdication of the Kaiser, there wasn't really such a thing as a formal government. So the SPD just decided to proclaim a democratic republic under the currently elected Reichstag, with the SPD as leader and as chancellor. The socialists didn't like that, so later that day they stormed the Reichstag and declared their own Free Socialist Republic of Germany on the same day. So, who was in charge? Depends on who you asked. If you asked a worker, they would have listened to the councils. If you asked a liberal, they would have listened to the parliament. The Social Democrats didn't like the council government because they thought the council would stand in the way of the transition to a social democratic republic. The armies were mostly on the side of the Reichstag because many of them didn't like socialists, and the Reichstag government made some promises to the soldiers. The Reichstag government sent out representatives to negotiate an armistice with the Allies to stop all the uprisings against the government. The representatives were pressured into signing the armistice document, which they had no influence in writing. So there was peace, a very costly and unpopular peace, but peace. This ushered in a period of dual power. The liberal democratic government, with the support of the Social Democrats, liberal parties, and the majority of the generals and armies on the one side, and on the other side, socialist councils and the Communist Party led by Karl Liebknecht and Rosa Luxemburg, who also led the Socialist Revolutionary Spartacus League. This period of dual government stayed in place for a good 3 months, until finally, in January, the socialists decided to take power for once and for all. Inspired by the October Revolution, only a year earlier, the Spartacus League and its members all across Germany started an uprising to secure the councils as the definitive government of the state. They did this via general strike and armed rebellion. And then the Social Democrats doubled down on their betrayal of leftism by allying with the so-called Freikorps. A Freikorps was a previously military unit which was officially dissolved by the armistice, but which continued to operate, just without government supervision. Most of them were battle-hardened Kaiser or Reichstag loyalists, some even proto-fascists. They essentially killed all members of the Spartacus uprising in the name of the Social Democrats. Then the Freikorps found Karl Liebknecht and Rosa Luxemburg and brutally murdered them. Like really brutally. So brutally I can't describe it on YouTube. The workers' revolts under the guide of the councils continued for multiple months. They were even proclaimed their own socialist republics, for example in Bremen and Bavaria. They also organized a German general strike. Then the SPD sent in the Freikorps. Again, they killed 12,000 people just in Berlin. Most of them unarmed protesters. And then they executed everyone who had surrendered. This pattern would continue for years. The socialists would try to take power, and the proto-fascists in their alliance with the social democrats would kill them all. Eventually, the workers were all destroyed or dissolved, and the thing remaining was the Weimar Republic, which, as we all know, turned fascist within 2 decades. So, in conclusion, this was kind of fucked up. Germany was very close to forming a Soviet-style council government, but was ultimately betrayed by the power-hungry Social Democrats, who cared more about their position than about doing what the workers wanted. And ever since then, Socialists and Social Democrats haven't been able to get along. Because, in the end, Social Democrats don't oppose capitalism. In the end, the Sailors' Rebellion failed to end capitalism, but it successfully started a process that caused Germany to sign the armistice, ending World War I, and causing the abdication of the Kaiser. So they definitely had a large influence on history. I think this entire story makes for a great what-if scenario. What if the SPD leadership was more Marxist? Would there have been a civil war? Would Germany have allied with the Soviet Union? Or would it have been overrun by the Allies? This is, of course, not an alternative history channel, but I could totally make a follow-up video that goes into how the revolution would have gone. Comment if you're interested in that. Special thanks to Darius the Bird, Eric Betts, Harris Hawk, Hugo Castelos, Carissa, Daniel Hyman, Emily Marigold Klassen, Gabi Gita, Herdington Gurdington, Josh C., Classroom, Lilith Craft, Marxism Tonight, Nane Pema, Nora Quinn, Pote, Ramon DeVille, Red Shock Trooper, Sean Murphy, Silva, Skylar Magnum Turner, Stairmaster Chef, and Trey.